Welcome back, traveler of tides. Tonight you drift into salt-swept sails and the ancient songs of the Sea-Elves of Valsirien. Here, beneath silver stars and foaming waves, the oceans are alive with secrets and with war. You are safe now. Your thoughts may rest. Let your breathing slow, in and out, in and out. Let the ship's rhythm carry you, and if you find yourself returning to these calm waters night after night, consider subscribing to this channel. It keeps the lantern lit for you, so the tide always brings you home. Now, close your eyes and listen. The drums, they're beating, the enemy sails are near, the war for the waves begins tonight. The sails cracked like thunder as the wind shifted, rolling down from the eastern rim of the sky, where silver lightning rippled across darkening clouds. Admiral Elenath stood at the prow of the Virilinth, her cloak dancing behind her like a banner of the old sea kings, and her eyes, sea glass green and filled with foreboding, fixed on the line where the horizon began to vanish. The east wind sea, long calm and loyal to the elves of Valsirien, had turned restless, not because of the wind, not because of the rain that whispered promises in the dark, but because of the enemy sails that now broke the mist like a blade through silk. The corsairs of the Deepmarrow Isles had returned. Elenath whispered a command in the old tongue, and the ship's helm shimmered with a faint blue glow. Below deck, the core stone pulsed with power, channeling ancient magic into the hull. The Virilinth surged forward, cutting through the waves. Like a silver arrow, followed closely by 4 other swift frigates in a tight crescent formation. Above them, sea glass lanterns swayed from the rigging, glowing faintly with warding spells. A distant horn blew once, then again, then silence. Elenath's fingers wrapped around the polished edge of the prow. "Steady," she said, voice calm, yet every syllable tinged with steel. The silence was a trap, the storm was cover, and the enemy was closer than the wind would say. Then it began. A shriek like the tearing of the sky itself ripped through. The dusk as a bolt of molten pitch shot across the waves, slamming into the leftmost elven frigate. The Sirelin wood exploded, flames burst upward in a star-shaped blossom, and sailors screamed into the rising wind. "Archers to port!" Elenath called, already moving, her boots silent on the oiled wood. Enchanted bows lifted in unison, and before the next volley could come, a rain of silver-tipped arrows flew across the darkening sea. The corsair ship emerged from the fog. Black sails, jagged hull, a figurehead carved in the shape of a kraken's maw. Its ballistae reloaded with unnerving speed. A second bolt shot out, this time trailing smoke, its tip glowing with runes. "Windbreak rune incoming," shouted the deck mage. Elenath raised her hand and clenched it. The mage channeled her signal, and a shield of rippling air shimmered into place. The bolt struck and exploded harmlessly above them, sending fragments into the water like dark rain. A voice crackled in the speaking shell at Elenath's belt. "3 more coming from the south. They're surrounding us, Admiral." She lifted the shell. "Split the crescent. Virilinth and Nylora will flank. Left, the rest scatter and burn sails. Draw them apart, they want us clustered." The sea answered with fire. The next corsair broadside ripped through the wave crests, splintering wood and sending sparks skyward. Yet the elves did not falter. Like dancers on a vast, glimmering stage, their ships spun and veered, turning destruction into choreography. Elenath drew her sword, not just any blade, but Devarian, the sky-marked saber whose edge sang with starlight when drawn. She pointed it forward. "Boarding speed!" The Virulent tilted sharply, wind screaming in its sails, rushing toward the enemy ship. Grappling vines, green, living and grown from magically awakened seeds, burst from the side, latching onto the enemy's railing. Elven warriors swung across, silent as moonlight, blades flashing in rhythm. Elenath followed last, landing with a roll, parrying a corsair's spear and disarming him in the same breath. The deck of the enemy vessel was chaos. Smoke, screams, sparks flying from blade clashing against blade. An elven pyromancer spun through the air, her staff igniting a line of corsairs like candles. A war horn blew, close, too close. Another ship had slipped through the mist. Behind Elenath, a second corsair rammed into the Nylora, sending elven sailors tumbling like marionettes struck by a storm. "Fall back!" shouted a captain. "They're breaching the middle line." But Elenath's eyes weren't on the middle line. They were on the sea, on something rising, something vast. Beneath the enemy fleet, just below the surface, she saw it. Glowing lines curling like tendrils of ink in the water. Ancient magic. Forbidden. "They're not just here to sink ships," she whispered. "They're here to wake something." A sudden gust pulled her hair back. Thunder cracked like a broken drum. All around, ships burned, mages chanted, sails. Tor blades danced, and the rain began to fall, slow, heavy, and red like rust. The east wind sea had turned, and this battle had only begun. The enemy ship shuddered beneath Elenath's feet as something far below groaned in the deep. It was not the sound of wood or wave, but something older. A pulse that echoed through the bones, as if the ocean itself had drawn breath. Around her, corsairs surged forward, cloaked in salt-rot armor, faces marked with coral sigils, and eyes glowing faintly from some sea witch's gift. Elenath moved like a whisper through their ranks, her saber slicing crescent arcs of silver, sparks rising from contact. Her second-in-command, First Blade Thaliran, joined her flank with twin curved knives that danced like flame. "This isn't a raid," he said between parries. "They're stalling us." "I know," Elenath replied, ducking a spear thrust and returning the strike with a precise blow to the corsair's gut. "Something ancient stirs below. They've come to unchain it." And then the sea began to sing. Low at first, a resonance like a whale's call stretched through glass and storm, then higher, as though the waves themselves were chanting in a tongue lost to the surface world. The corsair captain stepped into view, taller than his crew, draped in kelp-woven robes, his hands glowing with sea-blue runes. His voice melded with the ocean's hymn as he raised a conch carved from obsidian. "The sleeper hears," he intoned, eyes rolling back. "The abyss remembers. By Deepmarrow right, we break the shell." He slammed the conch against the deck. It shattered with a sharp echoing crack, and the sea split. A geyser of water erupted between the ships, a column so massive it rose like a tower of translucent stone, glimmering with imprisoned stars. Within it, dark tendrils twisted. A single eye the size of a sail blinked once, then again. Elenath's breath caught. "No," she whispered. They found the mouthless god. The legends were true. Tales of a creature born when the first wave crashed upon the first shore, bound by song, chained in sleep beneath the east wind sea. The corsairs were summoning it now, feeding it with battle, death, and chaos. And the sea obeyed. Waves rose unnaturally, slamming into elven ships with a mind of their own. A whirlpool tore open near the centerline, dragging down one of the elven corvettes in a swirl of shattered wood and screaming voices. Elenath gritted her teeth. Signal the fleet. Defensive circle. Begin the chant of suppression. We'll never be able to hold it, Thalarin said. Not without... I know. Elenath's hand went to the pendant at her throat. It pulsed with faint blue light, the last remnant of her bond to the deep choir, an order long dissolved after the great coral schism. She had vowed never to call on it again. Until now. She pressed the stone. The wind froze. Time held its breath. All around her, the battlefield paused for a single heartbeat. Then came the reply. Across the water, from the cliffs of Aloran to the broken spires of the drowned garden, ancient harmonies rose. Humming stones, singing seabirds, the coral bells beneath Nael Thalas lit with a cool glow, and the ocean stirred, but this time in response to Elenath's voice. She began to sing, not in words, but in resonance, each note a command, a memory, a binding. The great eye in the column above them narrowed. The whirlpool slowed. The sea pushed back against itself. Corsairs screamed as their summoning unraveled. But even as the waters began to calm, the sky did not. A final corsair ship, larger than the rest and shaped like a bone whale's ribcage, emerged from the east. Its mast bore a black banner stitched with silver ink, the symbol of the Deepmarrow, Warlord himself. And atop the helm stood a figure with a crown of tide glass and a staff made of living tentacle. "He's here," Thalarin said, voice barely above a whisper. "The Warlord has come." Elenath stepped forward to the edge of the ruined deck, her saber lowered, eyes fixed on the silhouette. "Then let him see us," she said. "Let him see that the waves do not belong to the drowned." The sea calmed for a moment, long enough to breathe, long enough to reload, long enough for the elves to form a ring of light around the wounded heart of their fleet. The storm would return. The next assault would be worse. But for now, they held the sea. The coral walls of Nael Thalas shimmered beneath the surface like sleeping giants, their ridged spines catching the last light of the broken moon as the elven fleet approached. From the helm of the Virilinth, Admiral Elenath could already sense the shift. Waters that once greeted them with song now whispered warnings. Their sacred stronghold had been breached. The enemy was inside the reef. Scouts had sent the word through pearl shells before vanishing mid-chant. Serrated sails. Inside the maze, hiding, waiting. No elven ship had ever fought within the coral labyrinth. The ancient growths beneath Nael Thalas were as dangerous to sailors as they were sacred. One wrong turn, one bad current, and a hull would be sheared clean by coral spires. But Elenath had no choice. The Warlord was coming, and the elves needed to strike back. Captain Celirian's ship, the Stormchild, pulled alongside the Virilinth, its sails glowing faintly with rune marks of wind and lightning. Celirian himself appeared on deck with no sound, stepping across a floating plank like it was solid ground. Younger than Elenath, but sharp-eyed and fast-blooded, Celirian bore storm magic in his veins, a blessing granted at birth by the Tide Mothers. "The labyrinth's narrow," he said. "They'll fight in fragments, ship against ship. No room for formations, just reflex and luck." Elenath nodded. "Then let's give them a storm they'll never forget." She raised her saber, skyward, and the sky answered. Clouds churned, waves bent, and the wind blew sideways through the reef mouth like a warning. The fleet split. 3 frigates veering left, 2 circling wide to flank, and Stormchild and Virilinth diving straight into the coral fangs. Inside, light twisted. The coral reef reached up like frozen fire, pink and gold and bone white, with spikes sharper than blades and gaps just wide enough for the keel of a ship to squeeze through. Elven helmsmen guided with whispers and runestones, adjusting course every heartbeat. The first corsair attack came without warning. A serrated sail emerged from behind a coral ridge, flanked by 2 rowing skiffs bearing ballistae tipped with alchemical flame. They struck before Stormchild could turn, a bolt piercing her left flank, a second igniting the forward deck. Sailors screamed, casting water spells too slow to stop the blaze. Valsirien leapt into action, eyes glowing white-blue. With a shout, he summoned the breath of the storm. Lightning danced from his fingers, arcing across the mast into the burning bolt. A flash, and the flame was gone, replaced by black smoke and a single burst of thunder. The enemy turned to flee deeper into the reef, but Elenath was already ahead. "Hard starboard!" she barked. The Virulent spun left, brushing dangerously close to coral but clearing the arc, then cut directly into the path of the fleeing corsair. Vines launched again, gripping the enemy hull like strangling arms. Elven warriors crossed before the corsairs could reload, steel meeting rust in a spray of sparks. The coral echoed with sound, blades, screams, drums from deep inside the reef, signaling more enemy ships on approach. Valsirien's voice rang through the reef, amplified by storm magic. "Back to back, we hold them here!" The twin ships locked together, creating a floating fortress in the narrow reef channel. Corsair skiffs darted from shadows, harpoons flying, mages hurling coral spikes from enchanted staffs. A squad of Deepmarrow assassins climbed the coral walls, leaping down onto the decks in silence. Blades curved like sickles and laced with black ichor. Elenath met them at the mast, her saber a blur of moonlit steel. One fell, then another, but a third managed to slip past and plunge a dagger toward the helm. Valsirien was faster, throwing his blade across the deck, the impact spinning the assassin, mid-strike and sending him overboard with a splash. The reef boiled with activity now. From above, lookout mages reported no fewer than 6 corsair vessels weaving through the coral, circling like sharks. Elenath clenched her jaw. "They want to pin us here, bleed us against the reef." "Then we bleed them instead," Valsirien replied, smiling grimly. "I have an idea." He reached into a watertight satchel and pulled out a vial of swirling blue liquid. Storm seed, a forbidden alchemical agent. Tossing it high, he chanted an invocation in Old Valsirien. The bottle shattered mid-air, and a spiral of wind erupted, spinning into a vortex above the reef. Rain fell sideways, thunder growled, and the coral shimmered with electrical light. The storm touched every ship inside the reef, friend and foe. But only the elven ships had storm-ruined sails. While the corsair rigging burned, the Stormchild and Virulent surged forward, smashing into the enemy line like twin blades through paper. Elven warriors swung from mast to mast, riding wind gusts, to land behind enemy lines. The corsair rear ships, taken by surprise, tried to retreat and ran headlong into a trap. The outer flank of the elven fleet, led by the Pearlwing, had circled wide through the northern channel. With the corsairs distracted by the storm, they returned at full speed, launching flares into the night sky. Each flare signaled a volley, and a dozen corsair ships were crushed between the reef and the elven pincer. Flames reflected in the coral like underwater fire. Screams echoed into the abyss, and still more sails appeared. From the reef's edge, a new ship emerged, long, silent, smooth as stone. It bore no crew, No lanterns, just a carved prow in the shape of a closed eye. Elenath felt a chill. "That's not a warship," she said. "That's a shrine." And as the ghost ship drifted forward, the coral responded. It retracted, split, moved. The labyrinth itself was opening. Inside, glowing water, ancient stairways of shell and bone, a gateway to something deeper. The corsairs had found a passage beneath the reef, one that led, not to the sea, but to the forgotten halls beneath Naelthalis itself. The current pulled hard beneath the reef, colder than the sea above, winding through caverns of ancient shell and coral pillar temples, long claimed by silence. Elenath stood at the helm of the Virilinth as it descended into the trench, guided by deep light orbs and the hum of the city's blood channel, an ancient magic line that connected Naelthalis to the very bones of the sea. The ghost ship had vanished below minutes ago, and with it, the last chance of surprise. Ahead, a faint pulsing glow marked the gateway. Two immense spiral shells arched like tusks over a yawning tunnel, etched with runes that hadn't seen daylight in 1,000 tides. "This place shouldn't exist," whispered Thalarin. "We buried it after the Coral Schism." "And yet the Deepmarrow cult found it," Elenath replied, "which means they have something worse than memory on their side." Without a sound, the storm child joined them in the trench, its sails trimmed to a whisper, its deck crew silent as ghosts. Silurian stood at the bow, one hand on the mast, storm magic already sparking across his skin. "They're already inside," he said. "I can feel the tide trembling." "Then we follow," Elenath said, "but with anchors raised. If the current turns, we'll have to run." And so they went into the heart of the reef, where the trench walls rose on either side like the ribs of some buried god. What waited beyond was not a battlefield, it was a cathedral. The tunnel opened into a vast underwater chamber carved of black coral and ancient bone. Stone platforms floated on pockets of current, connected by strands of kelp and rope bridge scaffolding. Above, the water shimmered with unnatural light, rippling with the pulse of a great heartbeat. In the center of it all, the Leviathan. It lay coiled in slumber across the chamber's floor. Miles of scaled flesh, folded like a serpent of stone, its body wrapped in chains etched with elven runes. A head, shaped like a dragon and eel combined, rested on a pedestal of obsidian, and its breath, yes, it breathed, sent currents through the water with every exhale. It wasn't dead, it wasn't even fully asleep, it was dreaming, and above it, floating on a platform of bone and blood glass, stood the warlord. He raised a staff of black tidewood, topped with a sigil of broken song, and sang a word not meant for the living. The Leviathan stirred. Elenath's fleet entered the chamber like arrows from a bow, scattering across the platforms in a flurry of motion. Grappling hooks flew, warriors jumped, mages began counterchants as fast as breath allowed. The Sea-Elves didn't wait. They struck first. Silurian launched himself from the storm child, riding a lightning bolt through the water straight onto the central dais. The warlord raised his hand. Dark water surged upward like a shield, but Silurian shattered it with a storm burst. Their blades met in a clash of echo and power, the magic sending ripples that knocked coral spires from the walls. Corsairs poured from hidden tunnels in the trench, launching bone harpoons and fire orbs. The Pearlwing was hit square in the mast, its sails igniting, its crew leaping overboard into the black, Elven ships fanned out, flanking, surrounding, unleashing volleys of moonlight arrows that exploded in waves of light. But for each enemy they cut down, two more emerged. Thalirin and Elenath led the charge onto the Leviathan's back. Its scales were like obsidian armor, slick and massive, each the size of a ship's hull. The cultists were trying to unbind the runes carved along its spine, breaking the chains link by link. "If they wake it," Thalirin began, "they'll lose control," Elenath finished, "and it'll sink the ocean itself." A ballista bolt whistled past, then a second. It struck the Leviathan's eye just above the lid. It flinched. The chamber shook. From the depths of its throat came a sound no elf had heard in 10,000 years, a roar that wasn't sound, but pressure. Water rippled outward in all directions. Ships rocked, sailors fell, coral burst from the walls. And the chains groaned. The Leviathan awoke. It didn't open its eyes. It didn't need to. The pressure wave alone threw ships across the chamber like driftwood. One of the enemy vessels shattered against the far wall in a blossom of wood, and blood. Elenath grabbed hold of a rune ring embedded in the Leviathan's scale. "Hold!" she called. "Bind it again!" But the warlord raised his staff and shouted something in a lost dialect. The final chain cracked. The Leviathan lifted its head. What followed was a storm inside water. The beast rose, fully. Its mass alone forced half the reef to rise with it. Whole platforms crumbled, spires snapped. The Leviathan twisted, coiling mid-water like a god returning from exile, and slammed its tail once into the floor. The impact cracked the seabed and opened a fissure that began to drain the trench upward in a violent spiral. "Fall back!" Silurian screamed as the platform he fought on crumbled beneath him. He summoned a wind spiral to slow his descent and caught Elenath mid-leap as she was thrown clear from the beast's hide. They landed on the Virulynth's broken deck just as the ship was pulled sideways by the Leviathan's coil. "We can't kill it," Thalirin said, blood on his temple. "We can't bind it either." Elenath stood, breathing hard. The sea, turning crimson above them. "Then we ride it," the others stared. "You what?" "We ride it," she repeated. "To the gates of Nelthalas. Before it reaches the city, we bring everything we have. Every spell, every chain, every blade." The Leviathan had begun to ascend. Faster than any ship, it would reach the city in minutes, and if it surfaced, there would be nothing left but ruins and foam. "Then let's make it bleed," Silurian said, gripping her arm. Elenath raised her saber toward the rising beast, and the ship still floating in the chamber responded, converging toward the Leviathans. Back, warriors leapt, mages anchored storm lanterns, rope bridges extended between scale ridges, and the final battle began not at sea, but on the back of a god. The Leviathan broke the surface with a roar that shattered stars. A wall of water erupted as its head pierced the night sky, flinging clouds aside like smoke. Below, the sea churned and boiled, pulling wreckage and ruined ships into its wake. The coral towers of Nelthalas shimmered faintly in the moonlight ahead, still untouched. But not for long. Elenath clung to the saddle rig, embedded in the Leviathan's upper ridge, a massive chain-anchored platform hastily bolted down by her mages during ascent. The air was thinner here, the cold sharper. The wind howled past as the beast surged forward, a mountain of moving flesh and fury. Around her, her warriors held fast to the armored scales, blades drawn, eyes steady. From the sky, the storm child circled, not sailing but flying, its hull lifted by storm runes and Silurian's last burst of sky magic. He rode the prow like a thunder prince, casting streaks of lightning into the corsair airships now rising to meet them. Yes, airships. The warlord had called forth his final cards. Floating longships lifted by dark ether glass began to close in, sails flapping like wings, ballistae bristling. One loomed close to the Leviathan's shoulder. A war horn blew. Elenath raised her saber and shouted, "Board them! Let them feel what tide and steel can do." Rope hooks flew. Elves swung through the air. The wind howled louder than any scream as warriors met mid-flight. Blades clashed, spinning and sparking above a god. Elenath leapt across a scale ridge, landing hard on a passing airship's deck. 3 corsairs turned, too slow. Her saber danced in arcs of blue flame, slicing them down in rhythm with the wind. From above, Silurian shouted a warning. "They've rigged the ether glass to burst." The ship groaned, black veins glowing along its hull. Elenath ran. She didn't leap. She dove straight through the air, back toward the Leviathan's spine. The ship exploded behind her, showering sparks and bone across the sky. She landed, hard, tumbling, blood in her mouth, but alive. Below, the city of Naelthalas awoke. From the towers of pearled marble, beams of light rose. The choir of the deep had heard the call. Mages in white and silver began their chant, hands lifted, voices like waterfalls in harmony. A net of song spread across the water, webbing of pure resonance designed not to bind, but to calm. The Leviathan flinched mid-stride, its roar caught in its throat. But the warlord appeared once more, on a floating dais, conjured from black, tide and bone, rising from the sea beside the beast's shoulder. He raised his staff and shouted words that split the air. The spell struck the Leviathan, and the beast screamed. It reared. The sky bent. Elenath nearly lost her grip. "We lose it now!" Thaliran yelled from further back. "We lose the city!" "No," Elenath said, staggering to her feet. "We end this!" She ran across the back of the Leviathan, over bridges of scale and chain, past dying corsairs and falling comrades. She ran toward the warlord's platform. Silurian joined her mid-leap, landing beside her as lightning danced across his skin. "One more duel?" He grinned. "One more," she said. They jumped together, landing hard on the platform. It cracked beneath them. The warlord turned, his crown of tide glass glowing. "You cannot stop what swims in shadow," he hissed. "I do not need to," Elenath whispered. "I only need to silence you." Their blades met. Magic collided, skyfire and abyssal surge. Silurian and the warlord dueled like gods, lightning and black water slamming against each other in waves that threw the platform off course. Elenath weaved through it all, blade flashing. The warlord struck her once, fire in her ribs. She stabbed him through the shoulder in return, but he was too strong. He knocked her back, raised his staff high, and began to chant. Below them, the Leviathan thrashed again. The sea split wide. A note rose, not from the warlord, from the beast, a low, mournful sound. A song, not rage, not hunger, memory. Elenath blinked through blood. "It hears them," she whispered. "The city's song." The choir below sang louder. All of Naelthalas was singing now. Every tower, every mage, every child, not of war, but of the sea before the fall. The Leviathan paused. Its eyes turned not toward the city, but toward the warlord. Then it moved. With one swift turn, it flung its shoulder up, sending the platform and all upon it hurtling skyward. Elenath fell. Silurian caught her with magic. The warlord screamed. As his own magic betrayed him, chains wrapping around his legs, his arms pulling him downward into the deep. The Leviathan dove, not in rage, but in retreat. Not to destroy, but to return, and with it, the war ended. Elenath awoke in the shallows of Naelthalos, her armor scorched, her saber still in hand. Above her, the towers stood. The reef shimmered, and the tide, at last, was calm. The Sea-Elves built no statues, no song was sung of victory, only of memory, for even a beast of the deep, born in war, could be reminded of the world before it broke. And when the sea whispers now in dreams, it does not warn, it watches. For those who ride the tide with honor, the ocean remembers, and so ends the war of the deep. You've reached the end of this bedtime journey. If this story carried you far and brought you gently back, subscribe and return anytime. The sea is always waiting.